where the Antichrist will come from, according to the Bible. You will be shocked when you find out the 3 strong theories based on biblical principles. Each theory is compelling on its own, but when you see how they could potentially merge into a single figure, well, let's just say it changes everything. Number 1. The European Roman origin. The first theory comes from one of the most detailed prophecies in the entire Bible, and it's been the dominant view among prophecy scholars for centuries. In Daniel chapter 2, we read about King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a massive statue that represents the succession of world empires. Listen carefully to this description. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Daniel 2:32-33. Now, here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. Daniel explains that each metal represents a different empire that will rule the world. The head of gold, that's Babylon. The chest and arms of silver, the Medo-Persian Empire, the belly and thighs of bronze, Greece under Alexander the Great. But then we get to the legs of iron. That's Rome. And notice something crucial about this statue. It doesn't end with Rome as we know it historically. It ends with 10 toes, part iron and part clay. What does this mean? The Roman Empire will be revived in some form, but it will be a mixture, partly strong like iron, partly weak like clay. It will be a coalition, not a single unified empire like the original Rome. But Daniel 7 gives us even more specific details that will absolutely blow your mind. Daniel sees the same empires represented as 4 beasts, and when he gets to the 4th beast, Rome, he's terrified. After this, I saw in the night visions, and behold a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. Daniel 7:7. 10 horns, just like the 10 toes. But then Daniel sees something that changes everything. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. Daniel 7:8. That little horn, with eyes like a man and a mouth speaking great things, that's the Antichrist. But notice something absolutely critical here. He doesn't conquer the Roman system from the outside, like a foreign invader. He doesn't come as an obvious enemy. He emerges from within the 10-nation Roman Confederation. And here's what makes this theory so compelling when you look at modern Europe. The European Union currently has 27 member nations, but many prophecy scholars believe we'll see a core group of 10 nations that will form the prophetic nucleus of this revived Roman Empire. Some point to the Western European Union, others to various European military or economic alliances that could evolve into this 10-nation confederation. Think about this for a moment. If this theory is correct, the Antichrist won't be some obvious dictator who seizes power through military conquest. He won't be the stereotypical villain that we can easily identify and reject. He'll be a legitimate European political leader who rises through normal democratic processes. He'll be elected, not conquered. He'll be trusted, not feared. He'll be part of the system we already recognize as legitimate international governance. Scholars like John F. Walvoord, J. Dwight Pentecost, and Tim LaHaye have argued for decades that this European Antichrist will be a master politician who understands how to work within existing power structures. He'll speak the language of democracy, human rights, and international cooperation. By the time people realize his true agenda, he'll already have consolidated power through completely legal means. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. The prophecy says he will subdue 3 of the 10 kings. Not conquer, subdue. This suggests political maneuvering, economic pressure, or diplomatic coercion rather than military action. He's not just a conqueror. He's a brilliant strategist who knows how to neutralize opposition without appearing to be the aggressor. But hold on, because some scholars look at the exact same scriptures and see something completely different. What if we've been looking in the wrong direction entirely? Number 2. The Middle Eastern/Islamic origin. Here's where things get really, really interesting, and why some of the most respected prophecy scholars have completely reconsidered the traditional European view. When the Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, it didn't just disappear. It actually split into 2 parts centuries earlier. The Western Roman Empire, centered in Rome, collapsed under barbarian invasions. But the Eastern Roman Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, continued for another 1,000 years with its capital in Constantinople. Now, here's the detail that changes absolutely everything. That Eastern Roman Empire, which lasted until 1453, encompassed most of what we now call the Middle East. Modern-day Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, parts of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, all of this was Roman territory for over a millennium. But wait, it gets even more fascinating. When we read in Daniel 9:26 about the people of the prince that shall come, who would destroy Jerusalem and the temple, we automatically assume this refers to the Romans who destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. And that's correct. It was Roman legions. But here's the historical detail that most people miss. Those Roman legions were largely composed of Syrian and Arab auxiliary troops, not Italian soldiers. The historian Tacitus records that the 5th and 10th legions that actually carried out the destruction of Jerusalem were recruited primarily from Syria and the surrounding regions. So the people who literally fulfilled Daniel's prophecy about destroying the city and sanctuary were Middle Eastern, not European. If the Antichrist comes from the people who destroyed Jerusalem, wouldn't that point to a Middle Eastern origin rather than a European one? Now, here's where this theory becomes absolutely mind-blowing. In Islamic eschatology, there's a figure called the Mahdi, a prophetic leader who Muslims believe will appear in the end times. And the parallels to biblical prophecy about the Antichrist are absolutely stunning. According to Islamic tradition, the Mahdi will unite the entire Muslim world under his leadership, establish global justice and eliminate oppression, rule from Jerusalem, perform miraculous signs that prove his divine calling. Sound familiar? Some scholars like Joel Richardson, Walid Shubat, and Mark Hitchcock argue that the biblical Antichrist and the Islamic Mahdi are the same person, a charismatic Middle Eastern leader who will unite the Islamic world and then use that platform to deceive the rest of the world. Think about the current geopolitical situation. There are nearly 2 billion Muslims worldwide, spread across dozens of nations. They're waiting for the Mahdi just as Christians are watching for the Antichrist. What if Satan's plan is to give them both in the same person? What if the Antichrist emerges from the Islamic world with claims of being the Mahdi, but with enough international credibility to also appeal to the secular West? But there's still a third theory that might be the most shocking of all. What if the Antichrist doesn't just need to deceive Christians and Muslims? What if his most important target is the Jewish people themselves? Number 3. The tribe of Dan, Jewish bloodline theory. This third theory is going to absolutely blow your mind. And it might be the most disturbing of all because it hits closest to home for those who think they'd never be deceived. What if the Antichrist comes from within the Jewish people themselves? Let me start with something that should immediately grab your attention. Open your Bible to Revelation 7, where John lists the 144,000 servants of God who are sealed from each tribe of Israel. This isn't just a casual list, this is God's end times protection for His chosen people. Go ahead and count them with me. Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. That's 12 names, right? But wait, Israel had 12 tribes, and one is missing from this list: Dan. The tribe of Dan is completely, conspicuously absent from God's end times protection. Why would God leave out an entire tribe? Why would Dan be excluded from the 144,000 who are sealed against the judgments of the tribulation period? This isn't an accident. This isn't an oversight. This is a deliberate omission that demands an explanation. Let's go back to the very beginning, to Jacob's prophetic blessing over his 12 sons in Genesis 49. When Jacob gets to Dan, he says something that should send chills down your spine. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. A serpent, an adder in the path. In biblical symbolism, what does the serpent represent? From the very beginning in Genesis 3, the serpent has been the symbol of Satan himself. But it gets worse. Look at the historical record of what the tribe of Dan actually did. In Judges 18, we read about Dan doing something that no other tribe did. They became the first to introduce systematic idolatry into Israel. They didn't just fall into idol worship accidentally. They actively sought out false gods, hired their own priests, and set up an entire false religious system that corrupted worship in Israel for generations. And the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. Judges 18:30. This wasn't temporary backsliding. This was institutional apostasy that lasted for centuries. Dan became synonymous with false worship and leading Israel astray. But here's where this theory becomes absolutely terrifying. What if the Antichrist emerges from the tribe of Dan with legitimate Jewish bloodline credentials? Think about the strategic brilliance of such a deception. For Orthodox Jews to accept anyone as the Messiah, he must meet very specific genealogical requirements. He must be able to prove his descent from the tribe of Judah, from the house of David. No Jew who takes Scripture seriously would accept a Messiah who couldn't prove this lineage. The early church father Irenaeus, writing in the 2nd century, specifically taught that the Antichrist would come from the tribe of Dan. He wasn't alone. This view was held by many early Christian scholars who had direct connections to the apostolic tradition. And there's another disturbing detail. In 1 Kings 12:25-30, we read about Jeroboam setting up golden calves for worship. And where does he place one of them? In Dan. The tribe of Dan became associated not just with idolatry, but specifically with counterfeit worship that mimicked the true worship of God, but led people away from Jerusalem and the true temple. Could the man that Israel hails as their long-awaited Messiah actually be from the very tribe that has historically led them into false worship? Could the tribe that introduced idolatry to Israel be the one to produce the ultimate idol, a false Messiah who will demand worship of himself? But here's the most disturbing part. If the Antichrist comes from within the Jewish community with convincing messianic credentials, he won't just deceive Israel. he'll also deceive many Christians. And this brings us to the most astounding possibility of all. What if we don't have to choose between these three theories? What if they're all correct? What if the Antichrist is a figure who somehow embodies elements from all three origins: European political heritage, Middle Eastern religious credibility, and Jewish messianic credentials? Now, here's where all three theories start to come together in ways that will absolutely astound you. How he will fool Israel. The temple deception. Now we come to perhaps the most crucial deception of all: how the Antichrist will fool the Jewish people into accepting him as their long-awaited Messiah. This isn't just another religious con game. This is the culmination of a 2,000-year wait, the fulfillment of Israel's deepest hopes, and the key that unlocks his path to global domination. Here's what most people don't understand about Jewish messianic expectations and why this deception will be so devastatingly effective. For an Orthodox Jew to accept anyone as the Messiah, that person must meet very specific, non-negotiable requirements that have been established by centuries of rabbinical scholarship and biblical interpretation. First, he must be able to prove his descent from the tribe of Judah. This isn't a suggestion, it's an absolute requirement based on Genesis 49:10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. No one outside the tribe of Judah can legitimately claim to be the Messiah. Second, he must be from the house of David. Isaiah 11:1 declares, "And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots." Jesse was David's father, so the Messiah must be able to trace his lineage directly back to King David himself. Third, he must be able to rebuild the temple and restore the sacrificial system. This expectation is based on passages like Ezekiel 37:26-28. Moreover, I will make a covenant of peace with them. It shall be an everlasting covenant with them, and I will place them and multiply them, and will set my sanctuary in the midst of them for evermore. My tabernacle also shall be with them, yea, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Fourth, he must bring peace to Israel and establish Jerusalem as the center of world government. The rabbis point to Isaiah 2:4, "And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." These aren't minor theological points that might be overlooked. These are fundamental deal-breaking requirements that any Jewish messianic claimant must fulfill. The question is, how could the Antichrist possibly meet these requirements if he's the ultimate deceiver? The answer lies in the sophistication of his deception and the desperation of Jewish longing. The real test will be his ability to enable the rebuilding of the Third Temple. And here's where current events become absolutely fascinating. Right now, today, in Jerusalem, there are organizations that are actively preparing for the rebuilding of the temple. The Temple Institute has recreated dozens of the vessels and implements needed for temple worship. They've woven the priestly garments according to biblical specifications. They've identified and trained men from the tribe of Levi who could serve as priests. They've even bred red heifers that could be used for the purification rituals required before temple worship can resume. The Adoret Kohanim organization has been working for decades to establish a Jewish presence in the Old City of Jerusalem, as close as possible to the Temple Mount. They've been buying properties, establishing synagogues, and creating a community of observant Jews who could support temple reconstruction. Some groups have even created detailed architectural plans for the Third Temple, based on biblical descriptions and rabbinical interpretations. They've calculated the exact measurements, designed the layout, and prepared everything except the actual construction. All that's missing is the political will and the security situation that would make temple reconstruction possible. And this is precisely where the Antichrist's political skills will come into play. Daniel 9:27 gives us the exact mechanism he'll use. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. He confirms a covenant, a peace treaty, for 1 week. In biblical prophecy, this refers to 1 week of years, or 7 years. For the first half of this 7-year period, 3.5 years, he will not only allow, but actively enable the rebuilding of the temple and the resumption of sacrificial worship. Think about what this means strategically. For 3.5 years, he will be Israel's greatest protector and ally. He'll provide the security guarantees that make temple reconstruction possible. He'll negotiate the political agreements that allow Jews to worship on the Temple Mount. He'll be the one who makes their deepest dreams come true. Can you imagine the gratitude, the relief, the overwhelming joy that the Jewish people will feel? For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, they'll be able to offer sacrifices in their rebuilt temple. They'll be able to observe the biblical festivals as they were originally intended. They'll see the cloud of glory return to the Holy of Holies. They'll believe that the Messianic age has finally begun. But there's more to this deception than just enabling temple worship. The Antichrist will also need to fulfill the expectation of bringing peace to Israel and establishing Jerusalem as the center of world government. And here's where his political genius will be most evident. Consider the current situation in the Middle East. Israel is surrounded by enemies who have sworn to destroy her. The Jewish people live in a state of perpetual anxiety about their survival. Now imagine a leader emerging who can somehow resolve all of these conflicts. Someone who can negotiate a comprehensive peace agreement that satisfies both Israelis and Palestinians. Someone who can neutralize the Iranian threat without military conflict. Someone who can convince the Arab world to accept Israel's right to exist and even to prosper. This wouldn't just be political success, it would appear to be miraculous intervention. When people see impossible problems suddenly resolved, when ancient enemies become allies, when the threat of annihilation turns into the promise of prosperity, they don't just feel grateful, they feel like they're witnessing divine intervention. And if this leader also moves his headquarters to Jerusalem, establishing it as the center of his international authority, wouldn't this fulfill the Jewish expectation that Jerusalem will become the capital of the world during the Messianic age? But here's where the prophecy becomes absolutely chilling. Jesus himself warned about this exact scenario in Matthew 24:15-16. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. At the midpoint of the 7-year treaty, after 3.5 years of being Israel's protector and enabler, the Antichrist will commit what Daniel calls the abomination of desolation. He will enter the Holy of Holies in the rebuilt temple, declare himself to be God, and demand worship. Paul describes this moment in 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling, away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Can you imagine the horror? Can you imagine the devastating psychological and spiritual impact? For 3.5 years, the Jewish people will believe they finally have their Messiah. They'll believe their greatest dreams are being fulfilled. They'll let down their guard completely. But the deception goes even deeper than this. Consider the psychological conditioning that will take place during those first 3.5 years. Every day that the temple stands, every sacrifice that's offered, every festival that's celebrated, will reinforce the belief that this man really is the Messiah. The longer the deception continues, the more invested the Jewish people will become in believing it. And there's another element to this deception that's particularly insidious. During those 3.5 years, the Antichrist won't just be Israel's political protector. He'll likely be involved in their religious life as well. And here's the final, most disturbing element of this deception. It will all appear to be happening according to God's plan. The temple will be rebuilt according to biblical specifications. The sacrificial system will be restored according to Mosaic law. Jerusalem will become the center of world government, just as the prophets predicted. Peace will come to the Middle East, just as Isaiah foretold. Everything will seem to be fulfilling biblical prophecy perfectly, until that moment when the Antichrist reveals his true nature and the greatest deception in human history becomes apparent. Can you imagine the horror? For 3.5 years, the Jewish people will believe they finally have their Messiah. They'll believe their greatest dreams are being fulfilled. They'll let down their guard. They'll trust completely. And that's precisely when prophecy tells us the Antichrist will reveal his true nature and strike with devastating betrayal. The man they welcomed as their deliverer will become their destroyer. The leader they trusted with their most sacred hopes will trample those hopes under his feet. The one they hailed as the Son of David will demand worship as the Son of God himself. Now we come to the climactic moment when everything unravels, when the greatest deception in human history collides with the sovereign power of Almighty God, and when the carefully constructed web of lies finally collapses under the weight of divine judgment. What happens next isn't just the end of the Antichrist's reign. It's the most spectacular display of God's power the world has ever witnessed. The prophet Ezekiel gives us a vision of how this all unfolds, and it's both terrifying and magnificent. But to understand what's really happening, we need to see how multiple end times prophecies converge into a perfect storm that will shake the very foundations of the earth.